Okay, so there's a few contentions that go on online about solipsism, perspectivism, relativism, objectivism, absolutism, I suppose. And the thing about this is that all of these, or intrinsicism, all of these have a grouping of language around them and about them, and how it is we point to them, how it is we speak and understand one another and can reiterate to the point where we would agree that we are speaking about the same subject or object of a point. These these things are all done in what Wittgenstein would call a language game. Okay, now the the language game. See, some people will say that the object that the baby, the data, because we're all nervous beings. The baby's experiencing data. The baby can now speak, and it can grab a ball, and you can ask it, who has the ball, and the baby can say, I have the ball, and then you can say, well, if you give me the ball, will you have the ball anymore? And they'll say, no, you'll have the ball. Okay, so the ball is not a platonic ball by any means. It's not fulfilling any platonic form. It's not representing itself. But the grammar that goes along with ballness fulfills the sense of what it feels like to have this impulse, this object, this data. Um, and I guess I'm going to start using tape now because that's within reach. Okay, so my body has the sense data of it. We can see it, the camera can see it, and so we call this object, and we call this a real object. Now, the perception of this object can change. You're not feeling it, I'm feeling it, so I'm perceiving it with my hands. I can hear it when I clip it, and the microphone may hear it, and the microphone can see it, and my neighbor can see this when they're here. And so the point is that even if I close my eyes, I have some sense of data. Even if I rotate it, even if the colors change, the light goes off, these different things, the perspectivism of the object is something that is a language grammar on discussing objects. Okay, so the grammar of perspectivism came after the object. Granted, everybody's seeing an object and the color, and we haven't talked about being aspect blind or color blind yet, where perspective of a non-object but of an adjective is has a different grammatical game around it. Okay, but for all objects in the world, perspectivism is secondary to that. Now, the reason we state that is because we know how the children, we know how individuals who are speaking language are referencing language. And if you say, if you start pointing to objects within the world, this is what science, reiterating further grammars of verification and justification of the interaction of these objects, will call physical objects, or actual objects, or objects of the real world, or real objects. And so it's promoted and damned by perspectivists that objectivism is true. Now, I will contend that objectivism is there. These are objects. This is how I refer to an object. I don't deny it. I don't always reference them as objects, but do I say that they cease to be objects when I'm no longer referencing them, or when I'm busy making some other dialogue? No, I don't thrust myself into a new dialogue of denial of objects. And I won't appeal to perspectivism. I don't believe that anyone else's seeing the object and hearing my referencing the object is going to mistake their seeing this for anything else, although they might just be staring through the screen or paying attention to something else, some other stimulus, some other data. But when we can get the focus or the distinction between all this other fodder, this supplement here, this essay over here, this data over here, this over here, that over there, and we can say, you on that side of the camera see that, me on this side of the tape see this, and we have a common focal point, a common distinction. At that point, the grammar is provided that the context is about whether or not this is an object. Well, it's not whether or not it is an object, it's how we refer to it. The man has a grasp of the tape. So there's an object to this sentence and there's a subject to this sentence. So the object of this sentence is the tape. The subject of the sentence is the man. Or maybe it's vice versa, you know. But the point is that there's a grammar that is inherited upon the use of the language, and the grammar has a rule system. And what is it to follow a rule? Well, to follow a rule is also something that it becomes innate in the process of utilizing the language, the process of making distinct one thing and excluding other things, and making certain that the distinction between, let's say, you know, because a function, as they're talking, mogul, casino mogul was on here talking about, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can write a function where the next one is 42. Well, that's fine, but the 1, 2, 3, 4, as far as the real number line, let me make the distinction, the real number line in consecutive primary numbers, or not primary numbers, but consecutive numbers, would lead to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on a base 10 system, which we can make further distinguishments. So we know what it is to have a statement, an expression, and a distinction, and then we know what it is to articulate the difference between this distinction and that distinction. But so many people are caught up in perspectivism, or they're caught up in believing that what is happening is all a milieu of data, and that there's nothing distinct and there's nothing grounded from which this milieu could have possibly come from. So the perspectivist, by arguing absolute perspectivism, is functioning in a solipsistic argument. And then I would say that they're not recognizing, or they're aspect blind to how it is we engage language and how we understand rules. So am I saying there is a real world? I'm saying there is a physical world. I'm saying we walk on a spherical orb and we move relative it to this, and this is how we refer to it. This is what our language says. Now, granted, perspectivism is, let's say, the same sentence translated into Chinese. I'm walking on the ground, I'm walking on the spherical orb, and I don't know how to speak Chinese. Well, from their perspective, their phonics, their distinction, their repetition, how they're interacting, I'll say that's a perspectivism. But whether or not they are referencing, and whether or not we can untranslate and not be lost in the translation, or to be confident in the translation, then we reference physical object first, or that this is one thing to be very distinct about, or maybe we will recognize color gradients first and then physical objects. So the grammar being public, being outside of us, the distinctions of how it is we take a grammatical phrase and discuss now the language of discussing language. So perspective arguments about, well, you don't know what's going on in my head and I don't know what's going on in your head, therefore all of this out here is completely relative and free game, that would lead to I believe complete random nonsense, where I would say go to the store and get some milk and you wouldn't even know what I was talking about, or you would say glue pedal blob kebab and bark and run down the street on all fours, meaning there's no rule discussed or understood, and then there's no rule that backs the situation. And so all I'm trying to get at here is that the rules are that the language is objective, it's outside of us, and it's internalized. But the justification for the language is, the verification is through agreement, and it's through noted grammars of agreement.